Only 5% of professing Christians read their Bibles once a month. This statistic frightens me when I think about how people react to world events.
During the 2020 presidential election, the country was split 51 to 47%. America is a politically divided nation.
But what if we could take politics out of the conversation entirely and just rely on the Bible alone?
Welcome to the Bible Speaks podcast, where we react to world events using Scripture alone.
In each episode, we analyze a significant current event through a biblical perspective.
I'm Daniel. I'm a former worship leader and a current elder in the church.
And I'm Brian, an ordained minister with a bachelor's in Christian ministry and a master of divinity in theology.
Our goal with this podcast is to help us all react to current events using Scripture alone.
And we hope that you enjoy listening to the podcast and enjoy the process along the way. Welcome to another episode of the Bible Speaks podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Daniel.
And today, in this episode, we're going to be discussing a new technology that has just come out called ChatGPT. And actually, it's not a new technology. It's just a new use of an existing technology, which is artificial intelligence. If you were to ask ChatGPT what it is, because what it is a bot, if you will, that responds to prompts given to it. And if you were to ask ChatGPT what it is, ChatGPT is an AI language model developed by OpenAI, which is the parent company. And it's capable of generating human-like text based on the input it is given. The model is trained on a large corpus of text data and can generate responses to questions, summarize long texts, write stories, and much more. It is often used in conversational AI applications to stimulate a human-like conversation with users. And again, that's if you ask the program itself what it is. Have you heard of ChatGPT, Daniel?
I have. I heard about it, I think, around New Year's, like early January, A relative of mine he's a bit of a tech nerd, and he was showing me all about it, like what it can do and giving it prompts. It was funny. He gave it one prompt that said, write me 2 paragraphs explaining why coffee is good for your eyesight. And it did a pretty good job. And then right after that, he said, write me 2 paragraphs explaining why coffee is bad for your eyesight. And then it did a pretty good, convincing job of both.
It argued both points.
Yeah.
So obviously it doesn't have a strong opinion.
No,
it's just a machine.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is also powered by what's called a large language model, and that means that it's programmed to understand human language and generate responses based on a large corpora of data. Basically what that means in layman's terms is that this is a technology that is given the ability or has been made to provide the ability to answer us in human terms or in, for us it's English, in understandable and relatable English terms. It has something called 175 billion parameters, and these are basically arguments that have been placed into it. It's taken all of the data that it could possibly find from the internet and gathered it all together. You remember on Jeopardy a while back, there was a competition between the Jeopardy pros and then this machine?
No, I don't remember that.
So they had, I forgot what it was called, but they had this show where these Jeopardy winners went up against this machine, and they wanted to see who would win. It was kind of the same thing where they would present these prompts and then that machine would answer. This isn't a new technology.
Was it an AI powered thing, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think it was IBM who...
okay, that makes sense.
Right, and they brought it on with all of the data of the internet, and they wanted to see if it could answer questions faster than the pros.
Huh.
So the difference between that and ChatGPT is that ChatGPT answers you in a way that it seems human-like. So it's not just a simple answer, but it's actually a human response, like a human-like response.
Yeah, that's one of the cool, or maybe not so cool things about it. Is I've heard some people say well, what's the difference between that and Google? It's just a search engine. It's not just a search engine.
No.
It doesn't. It's not like Google where you give it a prompt and it gives you all these links to other websites where you can go and read and learn for yourself what the answer is.
Right. Do your own research.
Yeah, exactly. It just tells you the answer.
Yeah, and it's so useful, ChatGPT, that it actually has had 1 million people sign up for it. in 5 days after its release.
1 million? Or I thought it was more than that.
It's more than that now.
Oh, 1 million in the first 5 days.
5 days.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane, right? It's amassed over 100 million monthly active users in the first 2 months. So from 1 million to 100, wouldn't that be nice if our podcast was that famous?
Yeah, if we had like 2/3 of the population of our country listening in 2 months' time, that'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah, exactly. This makes it the fastest growing consumer application in history, ChatGPT.
That's nuts, man.
It is. One thing though that some people are warning about, there's a guy by the name of Will Williams who comes out of a British AI company called Speechmatics. And he says, on the one hand, there is a high level of flexibility and fluidity in interactions, and an engaging conversation is possible on almost any topic. But on the other hand, you never quite know when the model is making contact with reality and not overconfidently hallucinating. And hallucinating is a tech term for this type of a technology, AI technology.
Okay.
That basically says that it's just coming up with things to say. So they may or may not even be accurate because it's using a pool of information that already exists, and it's not able to differentiate whether or not that information is correct.
You know, that actually makes a lot of the research I did for this episode, it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
The responses that I was seeing people get. I came across this YouTube video of this guy who was basically having a full-on intellectual debate or philosophical debate with ChatGPT. He was asking it questions like, does God exist? Is the Bible real? You know, and I was getting a bit frustrated because he was acting, it's like he was thinking he was in a debate with an atheist. And
that's interesting.
Yeah.
He was assuming that the machine was an atheist.
He was.
That's interesting.
And he was getting upset when it wasn't giving him the typical atheist response to his questions.
Right, because it just scours the internet, right?
Well, what's interesting is that it would consistently play both sides. It would say, well, some people say God does exist, some people say he doesn't exist. And it would, from what I could tell, always try to just maintain neutrality on topics like that.
Yeah, and that actually brings up a really interesting point. I think it's going to segue well into the talk of whether or not we can even apply the Bible to something like ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. And that is that all technology is basically amoral, right? So at the root of all technology is, you're looking at ones and zeros. It's binary, right? And numbers like math is amoral at its core, in its nature. It doesn't have a morality. It's either on or it's off, right?
Yeah. So like if you want to use ChatGPT for certain things that there is a definitive answer for, like historical events, math problems, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, isn't one of the reasons that it was developed is to help write computer code? Well,
I don't know if that's one of the reasons it was originally developed, but it certainly does write computer code.
Yeah, because I saw an example of this guy. It was on some forum, and he had this code that it wasn't working right, and he didn't know why. So he had a conversation with ChatGPT, and it fixed it for him.
Yes.
So stuff like that, I think it's fine if you want to use it for that. Like you said, it's just software. There's no consciousness. It's not a living thing. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have the capability to be a moral agent.
Right. And so that boils down to what is the morality conversation when it comes to something like ChatGPT or any other AI language, which by the way, Microsoft has invested I don't remember the number, but it's an exorbitant amount of money into ChatGPT. Google is coming up with their own version, and they're even coming out with warnings about this particular version of this AI software. So it's obviously going to be a competing force in technology as we move forward, which I think is why it's really important that we have decided to talk about it.
Yeah.
So where does the morality conversation lie? And I think you would agree with me that the technology itself is not the moral issue; it's how it's used.
Yeah, this one was a bit difficult for me at first to determine the morality of it all, because it's so new, it's so kind of obscure, but then as I was doing my research, looking at the different ways people use it, that's when I realized, like you just said, it totally depends on the way the user intends to use ChatGPT, whether it's going to be a moral act or not.
Right. And so you have to look at the different types of applications that people have been using this for. And then, mentioned earlier the conversational aspect. People are asking it to write dating profiles to make them sound really good. Realtors are writing real estate listings with ChatGPT to make it sound very, professional and fluent. And then computer code, things like that. But then also there's a lot of concern in the educational environment that students are now using this to write essays and research papers. And I've even heard that ChatGPT is so sophisticated that it can write up to a master's level research paper.
Wow.
That's it. Yeah, it's crazy because I worked hard for a master's degree, and I spent a lot of hours researching and writing hundreds of pages of papers. And I'll tell you, this would have been a dream and a nightmare at the same time, and because it's compiling its own version of the information that it's gathering, it's technically original work by ChatGPT. So you can't go to the internet and see if somebody stole those words because these are original words.
Well, sometimes. So as I was researching, and specifically this issue of like kids using this to like do their homework for them or write papers, write essays and whatnot. OpenAI, they're actively trying to combat this with something they just launched a few weeks ago on January 31st that they call AI classifier. And some in the educational community have turned to this as an anti-cheating device. And what it is, I'll read you what they said on their website for their AI classifier. It says, "We are launching a classifier trained to distinguish between AI written and human written text." Unfortunately, though, it's not all that great yet.
Right.
OpenAI acknowledges this, but I read an article where Business Insider asked ChatGPT to write a 45-minute lesson plan for high school students on the American Civil War. And then they had an educational professional like go over the lesson plan, evaluate it, and give his 2 cents. And according to him, it actually did a pretty good job. It even went over. It went to like 55 minutes of material. But in his opinion, it did have some faults. For him, the fact that it remained apolitical and unbiased was an issue. I don't really know what he meant by that. He said I would have
preferred that.
Right? Yeah. I felt the same way. He said he would have preferred a more robust lesson plan or, something along those lines.
Okay.
And he said it wasn't very engaging, which I could see as an issue for a lesson plan, right? You would want, especially if you're going to be talking for an hour straight, you got to be able to hold people's attention.
It's interesting you say this because I was listening to something and there was a rabbi on who actually had written, or no, he didn't,
a sermon?
He didn't write it, but he had ChatGPT write it.
Yeah.
And then he told his congregation
that it was plagiarized or something.
Well, that it was from ChatGPT.
Okay.
And they said that it was engaging. They had said that it was a good message.
I didn't read that far in that article.
Yeah, and so I think it just depends on the audience.
Maybe it does, huh?
Yeah.
The crazy thing though is after Business Insider, had this educational professional look at the lesson plan, they then ran the lesson plan that ChatGPT gave them through OpenAI's AI classifier or identifier, whatever I said they call it. And the tool, they ran it through the tool, and it failed to tell Insider with confidence that the Civil War lesson plan was AI generated.
Well, there's been a lot more time developing ChatGPT than ChatGPT's fact checker.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, it's not perfect yet, but I think it's admirable that they're at least trying to mitigate, the way that people are using it in a way that a lot of people think is wrong.
They see the need.
Yeah.
They see the need. This brings up the first, I think, issue of morality is plagiarism in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
And I think so. I as I was looking into plagiarism, I started to wonder, okay, what is the definition of plagiarism, and how would it be applied to ChatGPT? So I looked it up, and plagiarism is defined as presenting someone else's work or ideas as your own, with or without their consent, by incorporating it into your work without full acknowledgement. And just to make sure that I'm not plagiarizing, that is from Annie Spratt on plagiarism from the University of Oxford. I wanted to make sure I put that in there so that I was not guilty of doing that. What's interesting about this is that ChatGPT, in and of itself, by creating its own words based on its deep diving research into its database, is not actually committing plagiarism. It's doing research. The problem is when other people, such as college students or high school students, or even business people, pass this information that ChatGPT has come up with off as their own without crediting ChatGPT. Then it becomes plagiarism.
Yeah.
Right? So then it becomes a theft issue, which I think is a biblical issue.
Yeah. So I thought of it as it's two issues, plagiarism. It's theft, in that, just like you said, you're taking something without permission, and then it's also lying because you're passing it off as your own.
Yeah, well, plagiarism is you don't have to let the person know. I mean, just to be technical, you don't have to let the person know you're using their work. You just have to credit them for it. So that's when it's still theft at that point. So things on the internet or research done by college students across the country, they just get, I mean, this is what I did. I checked out a bunch of books from the local library, the school library. I formulated my own opinions based on what I was reading and then put it on paper. But I had to credit the sources. They
When you did your master's research?
Yeah, master's and my bachelor's, and even in high school, right?
But I thought plagiarism was when you didn't credit the source.
It is, but you don't have to ask for permission. You just have to make sure that they're credited for their work.
Oh, I see the point
Yeah.
you're making. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good point of clarification then.
Right, but so that is still theft, though. If you do it, even because they have put out their work as public domain, if you will,
Yeah.
but that public domain still needs to be credited.
Yeah.
And so it's theft, right, in that regard. And what does the Bible say about theft, right? I mean, one of the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20:15, you shall not steal.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I found another one that I thought it worked strangely well for the topic of plagiarism. It's Leviticus 19, verse 11. It says, "Do not steal, do not act deceptively or lie to one another." So you got stealing and theft.
Yeah, and
stealing, theft, and lying.
And
right
acting
there.
deceptively.
And acting deceptively.
Right, you're deceiving the person into believing that it's your work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Romans 13:9, just to kind of get out of the Old Testament, says, the commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, or any other commandment are summed up by this commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. And so I think that really puts us into an interesting Christian topic of loving each other. Right? The commandments are summed up in the law to love one another. And if you're stealing from somebody, you're not loving them.
That's a good point.
You know?
Yeah.
So in and of itself, you're not only breaking the command of stealing that God has told us not to do, but you're also not loving the person that you're stealing from.
Yeah, and you're also not acting in a righteous manner, right? Proverbs 10:2 says, "Ill-gotten gains do not profit anyone, but righteousness rescues from death." Right? So cheating, lying, stealing, all those things, they don't actually gain us anything good.
Right.
Right? We're not acting righteously. We're not loving each other the way God has commanded us to. We're acting deceptively. It's just all around. It's not good if you choose to use ChatGPT in that way.
Right. Right. If you're plagiarizing anything at all, you're not acting in accordance with Scripture.
Yeah. Yeah. Not just ChatGPT. Plagiarism in general.
Yeah. It's not just an academic offense. I believe it's also a Christian moral offense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I would agree.
Yeah. One other thing that I looked up when I was going through how ChatGPT kind of came about was, I don't know if you even saw anything about this, but it's worth mentioning. There was a Time magazine or Time.com article that was put out here in 2023 that talked about how ChatGPT outsourced their labor force. And they actually outsourced it to the labor force in Kenya. And they paid them $2 an hour to do the work that they needed to do. And And I looked that up because I thought, wow, that seems pretty low to us in an American audience. But it actually ended up being about double the minimum wage out there. I'm not saying that they live well. I'm just saying that it was actually a reasonable rate. So so work exploitation was not part of this. I know that with tech industry, especially with some of the history with the tech industry, with how we acquire the metals that come into our technology, or even the workforces that have been used by Google and Apple in the past. They've been, subpar, if you will. They haven't treated people well. But I don't actually see that as being an issue with this. So I don't want to get into that.
That's good.
Yeah. But what I do want to say is that the job that these people had to do was to me interesting. They actually hired this workforce to scour the code to find explicit material so that they could take it out of their coding. So when you got responses from ChatGPT, those responses didn't include explicit material.
Like curse words and stuff?
It would be curse words, violence, sexually explicit material, things that were related to racism, and also things that were related to self-harm. So they were given a criterion.
Wow.
Yeah, the things that they had to actually to dig through. And to OpenAI's credit, they did not expect this workforce to actually find all of the data in their mass collection of information. So they used the information that the workforce did give them and created another AI to finish or to do the bulk effort of scouring the database to remove this material. But the reason I bring that up is because one of the topics I wanted to discuss was, is it wrong to subject people to explicit material as Christians? Is that something that we should or should not do? And
that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I really had to consider how I would feel if that was my job.
Oh.
Right? If I was getting paid to sort through explicit material, especially things that I just don't want to see.
Was it all text based? It would have been, right? Because ChatGPT is text based.
Well, ChatGPT it is text based in its responses, but its database was the internet.
Oh, so it was just everything: pictures, videos,
right,
chat rooms,
right, exactly. And they're saying that they had need for therapy or therapist sessions afterwards because of how much stuff they were exposed to. And I kind of just put this down. For one person to subject another person to anything against their will, who also doesn't have any kind of authority over them, such as a parent, is just non-biblical in and of itself. We're not to force other people to do things that would harm them.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and we are to keep our minds. So I wrote down some passages about this. So we are to keep our minds on the pure things of God as often as possible. Romans 12:2 tells us, "Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God." So we're to renew our minds with holy things, right? So that tells us that we should probably abstain from things that would be explicit or things that would be immoral to God. We're to flee from sin. 2 Timothy 2:22 tells us to flee from your youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace. Right? So these are things that obviously are good for us in contrast to things that are explicit or bad for us. And then 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and 22 says, "Hold on to what is good and stay away from every kind of evil." So we are, as Christians, supposed to be staying away from things that are considered evil by God, right? Just in general. But one thing that did cross my mind is, what about people who have made it their jobs or who have taken jobs to engage in this type of material for the protection of others? Because that is, in a sense, what these Kenyan workers did.
Yeah.
They engaged in this for the protection of everybody who would be participating in ChatGPT service, right? So one of the things I came up with was something called ICAC. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's ICAC, ICAC, and it's the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force that is nationwide.
I think I've heard of it. It's like in the United States?
It is. It's in the United States. It has local law enforcement, government law enforcement involved.
Yeah, I have heard of that.
Yeah. And what these people basically do is they scour the dark web for child pornography.
And sometimes they'll like pose as children, right? To,
yes.
Like lure out child predators.
Yes. And I read up that they're both proactive and reactive, which means that they have to expose themselves to this material in order to rescue these children.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so I really started to think about this, and I found this passage, Galatians 5:16. It says, I say then, walk by the Spirit, and you will certainly not carry out the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is against the Spirit, and the Spirit desires what is against the flesh. These are opposed to each other, so that you don't do what you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. And the reason I chose that was because I think it's a motive and temptation issue, right? If you're being exposed to explicit material causes you to sin, then you have no business as a Christian exposing yourself to such material.
Yeah. If you are exposing yourself to something that does cause you to sin, we are told in God's word to cut those things out of our lives.
Yeah, to flee.
Yeah.
Right? To flee from the devil, to flee from sin, to get rid of them altogether.
Yeah.
However, if you're not affected by these types of explicit material and you can rescue other people or do good for other people, I don't see that as contrary to God's word.
No, in fact, I see that as quite a noble task, you know? You're willingly going into these dark places, right? But it's for the greater good. You're doing the work so that you can rescue these, young, like, innocent lives from these horrific circumstances.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think you could say the same about, homicide detectives who are trying to find, criminals, anything that special victim unit type people who are looking into sex crimes, anything like this, you're going to have to expose yourself to explicit material. But if you're not affected by it and you can do good for other people, then I think it's something that we can rightly say that according to Scripture, it's okay.
Well, just a point of clarification, I guess. When you say when you're not affected by it, you mean it doesn't cause you to sin, right?
Right.
Okay, because I work in the first responder area,
right.
And I've heard firsthand stories from EMTs and paramedics of these horrible things that they experience day in and day out when they're running 911 calls. And some of them, they do have to get therapy regularly. They need someone to talk to help them work through things in their own life because of the horrible things they see all the time.
Oh, right.
So it does affect them,
yes.
But it doesn't cause them to sin.
It's not. It's a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
Which they should seek help in dealing with those issues.
Yeah.
But you're right, and it's a good clarification to make. I'm referring specifically to falling in our faith or doing things that would be against God, causing us to do things that are against God, or even tempting us. Right? If you're tempted in any way by any explicit material, then you shouldn't engage in it, regardless of the amount of good that you may or may not do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Did you have another topic?
Well, I had some more to say on the morality of ChatGPT.
Okay.
Let me just find it. Oh, yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I came across that YouTube video of the guy who was having a philosophical debate
right.
with ChatGPT. I decided to ask ChatGPT the same question that he asked it to see what response I would get.
Oh, personal experience.
Because his issue,
A little personal experience. I like that.
Yeah. So his issue with it was, it seemed like it was kind of in a backhanded way calling Christians dumb. And I was like, yeah, I want to see if it does the same thing when I ask it, does God exist? So I went on ChatGPT, I made an account, and I asked it, does God exist? And just for clarification, I did end up asking ChatGPT if I can publicly quote it on all of the responses it gives me, and it said I could.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
So,
as long as you give it credit, right? Yeah, you're not plagiarizing.
It said the question of whether God exists or not is a deeply philosophical and personal one, and opinions on the matter vary widely. As an AI language model, I don't have personal beliefs or opinions, but I can provide you with some information to help you make your own decision. Many people believe in the existence of God, and various religions have their own concepts of a higher power. Some arguments for the existence of God include the complexity and order of the universe, the concept of morality, and personal experiences of the divine. On the other hand, there are also arguments against the existence of God, such as the problem of evil, the lack of empirical evidence, and the inconsistency of religious beliefs. Ultimately, whether or not God exists is a matter of personal belief and faith, and different people will come to different conclusions based on their own experiences, knowledge, and reasoning. It's important to approach the question with an open mind, consider different perspectives, and respect the beliefs of others, even if they differ from your own. So again, that was all a AI-generated response. And I think it's a really good way to answer a question by not answering a question.
Well, I think
Right?
I think it provided actually a fair and amicable response to your question.
Well, yeah, it did. It didn't give me a yes or no answer, but
Right.
like I told you earlier, in my experience, it seems to me like it just kind of remains neutral and it presents both sides of, these definitive type of questions.
One of the things I really appreciate about that response was that it admitted its own limitations.
Yeah, which it does multiple times. Like when you ask it things regarding like human qualities or conscious qualities of like a conscious being, it says I'm an AI language model, and like it starts out its response by telling you that it is just technology and it has limitations.
It's interesting that you make that point, because when I first heard about this, I was also introduced to it by a friend of mine before it blew up and became 100 million plus people using it. My first reaction was a little bit of fear. I've always had a very skeptical approach to AI in general, just because of maybe I watched too much Terminator when I was a kid,
Yeah.
a little too much Skynet there. But yeah, I've always just been kind of put off a little bit by AI because of that idea that it could pose as
It can become sentient.
it could become sentient, or it could pose as a real person. And I really appreciate that at least this version
Oh yeah.
of software is self-admitting what it is and its own capabilities and what it can't do as well.
Yeah. So I was having some fun with it, right? And so I decided to ask it, tell me if ChatGPT is moral or not from a biblical point of view.
Interesting.
Which I should have just done from the beginning because it gave me a really good answer and it would save me a lot of time. It said, as an AI language model, I don't have personal beliefs or morality, and I do not have the ability to act or make decisions. I can provide information and answer questions, but I don't have moral agency. From a biblical point of view, morality is based on the teachings and principles outlined in the Bible. These include the Ten Commandments and the teachings of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. However, as an AI language model, I do not have the ability to follow or violate these teachings because I am not a moral agent. It is important to remember that moral responsibility and agency are attributes of conscious beings. As an AI language model, I don't have consciousness or the ability to make moral choices or actions. My responses are generated based on statistical patterns in the data I was trained on and are not based on personal beliefs or values.
Yeah, and that really brings us back to where we started,
Yeah.
isn't it? That technology in and of itself is amoral.
Yeah. So, and I think that's what was so hard for me to determine the morality. I was like, it has to be moral or it has to be immoral. And I finally realized, no, it's amoral. It depends on how you want to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have anything else? I kind of wanted to close on a thought, but I want to make sure I give you the opportunity to say whatever you want to say.
Really, the only question that I could think of that might pop into people's minds when it comes to ChatGPT is it sinful to use ChatGPT? Like there's
Good
a whole
question.
plagiarism issue. People can use it to cheat in school, stuff like that. And again, it just comes back to the morality issue. Being that it is technology and it is amoral, it depends on how you want to use it. So if you want to use it to do your homework for you or write a speech or presentation and then pass it off as something that you wrote and take credit for it, you're being dishonest and you're lying, and that's a sin, right?
Absolutely.
But if you want to use it just to goof off for a little bit or ask it to fix a computer code or pretend like you're having a debate with an atheist, it's It might be a waste of time, but I don't see there's any moral issue there.
No, and it has its uses. I mean, you might ask it to help you fix a car or fix some other form of technology or do any kind of simple thing.
Yeah.
I think it has a wide range of uses that aren't immoral.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Yeah, so I kind of want to end with this thought, and just to kind of bring it all back to biblical Christianity, is that no matter what we use in regards to technology, the morality boils down to the individual using it.
Yeah.
Right? We are the ones that are ultimately held responsible by God for the actions that we perform, by the decisions that we make in regards to whether we want to be obedient or disobedient to Him. And so, again, if you, like to your point, if you want to use this technology for useful and morally upright methods or ways, then you're more than welcome to do that in whatever fun ways you can plan ahead or figure out.
Yeah.
But any usage of it to plagiarize or to steal or even to perform a nefarious action is obviously an immoral act to God and something that we as Christians should not do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is another episode of the Bible Speaks podcast. You can reach out to us and provide any feedback, or if you want to suggest a story that we can cover, you can reach out to us at the Bible Speaks podcast at gmail.com. That's all I have for today. Daniel, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, if you guys are listening to us on Spreaker and you have an account, all you have to do is sign in and you can actually leave a comment, and we would love to hear from you guys. Or you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Again, we'd love to hear from you guys and get some feedback. So, thanks for listening.
All right, until next time.
See you next time.